Okay, I would like for everybody to rise as we greet the command and our honored guests. Okay, if you can remain standing, we'll present the national anthem. Be seated. My name is Ronnie Martin. I'm the Asian American Pacific Islanders Coordinator, and we'd like to welcome our guests, Mr. Terry Shima and Ms. Mary Murakami. We'd like to thank you for coming, and we'll kick off our ceremony with opening comments. I would like to invite Mr. Mike Gagnon up. He's the program manager for the Special Emphasis Program in the MHEAD.
How you doing? I'm Mike Gagnon from the EEO office, and I am the Special Emphasis Program Manager. And under the Special Emphasis Program, we have an opportunity to take moments throughout the year to stop and pay tribute to the many, lots of words there, the many attributes and the things that, I didn't think I was going to lose it, but here I am losing it. We just pay respect and take a time for a little bit of education and awareness of the contributions of the many different people groups throughout our country that historically we may have left out of history books and historically lost millions of moments where recognition should have been paid. So I couldn't have done this without a whole bunch of help from the crew and from Ron Martin here, who is the Special Emphasis Program Coordinator for Asian Pacific Islander Month, and from Ms. Ruth Doherty, who is the sponsoring department, which is something we started here newly, and it's been working out great, and I am amazed and thankful for everybody who has attended today. And I've got a lot more to say, but I'm going to make it short and give it back to Ron. Thank you.
Okay, I would like to add and thank the coordinating team, and I would also like to recognize Mr. Frank Say. He's the champion for the program, and the program is set up to basically represent, all groups. This is a multicultural nation. It's a multicultural base, and we like to recognize and have everybody feel like they're included. So in celebrating these events here, it's observance to the heritage that throughout the years, the many, many years, which is, you could see today our guest is going to take you back into history and tell you of the contributions, and remember we study history, to understand and predict our future. So take the time to listen at their story today. Feel free to offer, ask questions of them, and just have a great time. Now the event today includes in observance of this day, this month, we do what we call education, which we got exhibits. I would like to thank the library, who we tapped into both online and on base to present materials for you to read, understand. We got exhibits from the team that bought exhibits out, and a cultural expression, all over the world is food. So we got food afterwards. So before I introduce the next guest, I would like to say one thing on a personal nature. I have an affinity for all cultures, and that's why I chose to represent the Asian Pacific Islanders cultures as the coordinator. Within the last 20 days of starting this event, I've met more people than I would have just doing my day-to-day job. So I would like to share that experience with you guys because that's important. That's what makes you a better working environment. So if you, take the time to enjoy this day, get to know the people that you're sitting beside and, enjoy. Now I would like to introduce our technical director, Ms. Karen Burns, who would introduce our guests.
Thank you, Ron, and good afternoon, everybody. This program has been well planned and talked about, and I can say when I came into the building here, you could just feel the energy surrounding this program, and we're very excited to have our speakers here today. But before I introduce them, I would just like to say welcome to this year's event. I am pleased to have our guests that are going to be joining us today. And so at the beginning of May, we ushered in the Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month celebration. This month gives our nation the opportunity to further highlight significant accomplishments of Americans of Asian and Pacific Island descent. The official history of the celebration dates back to October of 1978, when President Jimmy Carter signed a bill declaring that the first part of May as Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Week. 12 years later, George H.W. Bush signed an executive order leading to the designation of an entire month for this celebration, a law officially signed in 1992. The month of May was chosen in order to commemorate the 1943 arrival of the first Japanese immigrants to the United States and the 1869 completion of the Transcontinental Railroad, a project in which Chinese immigrants were a major part of the workforce. Today, Asian American and Pacific Islanders represent close to 50 countries and ethnic groups in over 100 languages and dialects. There are about 16 million Asian American and Pacific Islanders residing in the U.S., which equates to about 5.5% of our population. These men and women shape the fabric of this rich nation in which we serve. The 2014 theme for Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month is I Am Beyond. It exemplifies those with the courage and ambition to move beyond barriers to equal opportunities in America. I Am Beyond recognizes political activists like Mr. Dalit Singh Chand and the first American Congressman, Ms. Patsy Mink, the first woman of color ever to be elected to Congress. It also highlights athletes like decorated Olympians such as Michelle Kwan and Apollo Ono. It reflects the lives and accomplishments of today's keynote speakers that we have joining us. And in my eyes, this theme also recognizes the impact and achievements of our own personnel here at the Indian Head EOD and the people within our own community who work and serve our great country every day. So first, to introduce Ms. Murakami. Mary Tamaki Murakami was born in Los Angeles, California. She and her family were incarcerated in the Topaz, Utah internment camp. A graduate of the University of California, Berkeley, she has had a lifetime of public health laboratory certification and has served as a medical technologist and licensed in that field in the state of California. She has served as a microbiologist for the Los Angeles County and Medical Technologists Organization in Stanford, Palo Alto Hospital, before coming to Washington, D.C., where she worked for the Arlington County Public Health Lab in 1957 until 1960. She was the office manager and dental office assistant to Dr. Raymond S. Murakami, her husband, in Washington, D.C., and she served in this capacity until 2004. Our second speaker, Mr. Terry Shima, was born in Hawaii. He was drafted into the U.S. Army on October 12, 1944, and trained at Camp Blanding, Florida, as a replacement for the 442nd. He arrived in Italy on VE Day in 1945 and joined the and was deployed to northern Italy and was assigned to his public relations office. When the 442nd returned as a unit to the U.S. in June of 1946, Mr. Shima returned with the unit to handle public relations in New York City, Washington, D.C., and Honolulu. New York City gave the 442nd an unprecedented huge welcome, and they marched down Constitution Avenue and was reviewed in Washington, D.C., and was reviewed by President Harry Truman at the Ellipse. They received another huge welcome in Honolulu for the deactivation of colors. Mr. Shima graduated from the Georgetown University School of Foreign Service, and he received the W. Coleman Neville's Gold Medal Award for the highest achievement in the field of U.S. foreign relations. He attended Georgetown University Graduate School and served in the U.S. Foreign Service. In February of 2013, President Barack Obama awarded the Presidential Citizens Medal to Shima at the White House ceremony. He is a member of the Maryland Charlotte Hall Veterans Home Commission, and Mr. Shima received 2 awards from the government of Japan. He also received the coveted Japan Foreign Ministers Award for supporting the GOJ's effort to build strong relationships with the Japanese American population. He was awarded in 2013 the Emperor's Order of the Rising Sun with gold rays and rosette for his role in promoting friendship and understanding between the government and people of Japan and the Japanese American population. He is now the retired executive director of the Japanese American Veterans Association and chairs the Outreach and Education Committee. So without further ado, I would like to introduce first Ms. Mary Tamaki Murakami, and she will be followed by Mr. Terry Shima.
December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. On the day after Pearl Harbor, President Roosevelt declared war against Japan and entered a unified America into the Second World War. A wave of rising fear and resentment against Japanese living in America led to the internment, 60% or more of whom were American citizens. Imprisoned in camps, labeled as enemy aliens and ineligible for military service, many Japanese Americans sought a way to prove their loyalty. After almost a year, the enemy alien designation was lifted, and an all-Japanese American Army unit, the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, was created. More than 10,000 men volunteered for combat from Hawaii alone. The members of the 442nd chose their slogan, "Go for Broke." The reference to the ultimate gamble represented exactly what these enlisted Japanese Americans were doing. They were risking it all on one great effort to win big. However, striking it rich was not the goal. Their gamble was to offer their lives to prove their loyalty. The predecessor to the 442nd was the 100th Infantry Battalion. Formed following Pearl Harbor, they fought in battles across Europe and sustained such an overwhelming number of casualties that stateside replacements were called up from the 1st Battalion of the 442nd. Upon arrival in Italy, June 11, 1944, the heroic 100th was redesignated as the 1st Battalion of the 442nd Regimental Combat Team. These soldiers were well trained and ready for battle as they moved into the theater of war. Following in the footsteps of the hard fighting of the 100th, the 442nd rescued many towns in Italy and eastern France, including the town of Bruyères. The 442nd is also heralded for the famous rescue of the Lost Battalion. During a fierce 5-day battle, the men of the 442nd sought to free 275 fellow U.S. soldiers trapped by German forces in the Vosges Mountains. These 275 men faced certain death unless the 442nd was able to save them. Victory came at an astounding cost. The commander reported combat casualties of the 442nd 2 to 3 times the number of those rescued. The rescue of the Lost Battalion has gone down in legend as one of the most ferociously fought battles in the history of the U.S. Army. The 442nd's growing reputation as saviors of those in need continued throughout the duration of the war. A division of the unit was among the first Allied forces to free Jews from the camps at Dachau. Many of those members of the 442nd found the liberation highly ironic and bittersweet when thinking of the internment camps they and their loved ones were sent to back home. The tremendous record of valor and sacrifice earned the soldiers of the 442nd the nickname the Purple Heart Battalion. Holding the distinction of most highly decorated units of its size and period of combat in the history of the U.S. Army, the 442nd received over 18,000 individual awards. The unit produced 21 Medal of Honor recipients, including George Joe Sakato and Senator Daniel Inouye. They also claimed more than 5,000 Purple Hearts, 33 Distinguished Service Crosses, 560 Silver Stars, 22 Legion of Merit Awards, and over 4,000 Bronze Stars. Additionally, the 100th and 442nd received the Presidential Distinguished Unit Citation 8 times. For their valor, courage, and loyalty to country, the members of the 442nd Regimental Combat Team are the recipients of the American Veterans Center 2007 Audie Murphy Award.
Mary Murakami and I represent the Japanese American Veterans Association. We wish to thank Mr. Ron Martin for the invitation here today, and also Dr. Doherty for graciously providing transportation. We are honored to be addressing the nation's leading experts on naval surface warfare. I will provide a very brief background. Mary will come out and talk about the internment. Then I will return to discuss the 100th, the 442nd, and those who serve in the Pacific. When Japan attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, there was mass hysteria against all persons of Japanese ancestry. We were viewed as disloyal, as saboteurs and collaborators of Imperial Japan, and we were tarred with the same brush that condemned the enemy. Our draft board classified us as 4C. 4C stood for enemy alien, unfit for military duty. We, loyal American citizens, were virtually disowned by our government. The second blow came on February 19, 1942, when President Roosevelt issued Executive Order 9066, which established 2 military zones, authorized the War Department to set up 2 military zones, each governed by a military governor with total authority, including internal security. At this point, I'll turn the discussion over to Mrs. Murakami.
If you don't mind, I'll remain seated. This is the background of my story as a teenager. Well, can you hear me? Oh, good. Living in San Francisco, Japanese town on December 7th. I was just one of the 120,000 internees, and to this day there are some who will not speak, but I feel I should speak so this history won't be repeated. and tarnish our democracy again. On December 7, 1941, the FBI already had a list of people they wanted to pick up, and they were going through Japanese town and picking up these people who did business with Japan, Japanese school teachers. Before the war, I went to American school, and then after school, we went to Japanese school. My mother always insisted we do our Japanese homework before we did our English homework. And so we were quite fluent in Japanese by the time the war broke out. Even judo instructors were picked up. But that night is when we really realized our lives would change, because we lived on the edge of Japanese town. And we realized there was no traffic going down Post Street, one of the main streets. And when we looked out our window on top of the crest of the hill where we lived, we could see the U.S. soldiers lined up. They were on the sidewalks, across the street, and on to the other side. They were not letting any traffic or any pedestrians in or out. They were armed, and we knew that things would change. And then on February 19, 1942, the Executive Order 9066 went into effect, stating you could only take what you could carry and be ready when the final notices came for you to report. During that period of time between Executive Order 9066 until we were taken, the most important means of communication with the U.S. government was the telephone poles. First notice went up, and then immediately after, the curfew notices went up. The curfew notices first were in miles. That was when my father and sister could no longer go to work. My brother could not go to high school. By the time the curfew notices were in blocks, I could not go to junior high school. The only one who was getting an education before we were interned was my youngest brother, because the curfews were within blocks of our home. During that period of time, we had to rush and get rid of all our furniture. We did not own our home because the U.S. law would not let Japanese immigrants own property. And most of the children were too young to own property. If you were fortunate and you knew a white person that you could trust, those people gave the money to a white person, they bought the property, and when this family's children were 21, they gave back the property. Otherwise, we were renting. Our furniture was bought by people who came through from house to house. They bought our house for one price, and they came back the next day and bought our piano in front of us for what they had paid for the whole household. Our parents believed the rumor that the children would be separated from the parents. So they went to a photographer and took their picture, gave one to each of us 5 children, and told us our family history. And then the adults decided that the things that we did not want to sell, we could have a small space in the social hall of churches that were originally run by Japanese. And so our church, my father was put in charge of the social hall. We must have had an area maybe a little bigger than this table to put whatever we wanted to. They were in various places in the Western defense areas, but by the time we returned from the war, they were all broken into, so there wasn't much left. I did see my sewing machine, but when I opened it up, all that was left was they had taken the machine and left the framework. We finally received our notice in the beginning of May. You usually had 7 days to report. And there were 16 assembly centers in California, and Chamfred Racetrack was one of them. Each of these places held from 16,000 to 10,000 internees at one time. Chamfred Racetrack was in South San Francisco Bay Area, and that's where we lost our identity, and we became family 22416. I was letter E by birth order. We were one of the lucky ones because the horse stalls were already filled. The people who went to the camp first were put into the horse stalls. They were only whitewashed, they still smelled. Some of the mattresses weren't ready, and they were given canvas bags filled with straws. We were put into temporary barracks in the inner track, and each family had one room, and the ceilings dividing the dividers did not go to the ceilings, and every family just had one room, so there were 7 of us in one room, and all the government gave me was an army cot. We ate in mess halls, and there was no formal education. Therefore, the educated internees got together and decided to hold classes underneath the grandstand, and they taught us whatever they knew. Our entertainment was internees who had any type of talent. They would stand in the track area and perform, and we would stand in the grandstand. Our form of entertainment was running around the racetrack in the morning for exercise. The 10 permanent camps were ready in the fall of 1942, and Topaz opened on September 11th. We were one of the fortunate ones again because my sister volunteered to be with the first contingency to get Topaz organized. We were only supposed to get one room, the larger room, but she said that if they would give us 2 smaller rooms, my brother and parents could be in one room and we could be in the other. So life started in 2 rooms, but when we arrived in Topaz, all we saw was the fine dust. And in the book written by my classmates, one of my classmates thought the regulation was to wear white shoes because the shoes were all covered. But that wasn't so, and all I saw were the black tarred barracks as far as I could see, barbed wire surrounding them, and guard towers at each corner, armed with U.S. soldiers, and guard towers in between. There was, in our rooms, there was army cots, one for each of us, and a pot belly stove. That was all the furniture the government gave us. But they were not finished building Topaz. So at night, the white guards left, and the guards during the night hours were internees. One was a member of our church, and he would tell everybody when the new lumber came in. So we would all go and help ourselves, and that is how we got our tables, dressers, and whatever we needed. Some of them were quite beautiful, in fact, and they are shown at the Utah Museum. But my main concern in camp was my education. I was determined to go to college regardless of how the government kept me in those camps. I had missed most of my 9th grade from the waiting to be put into camp, and then at the assembly center there was no education. But by the time I was in high school, which was held in converted barracks, they said there wasn't enough academic courses when I was a senior, so they recommended I start high school all over again. So I was told to start 9th grade. My father became very concerned about that, so he asked an engineer friend to teach me higher math. And I read as many books as I could. And that came in handy because when the camp was going to close, In January 1945, California reopened to the Japanese people. The University of California and a private school came into the camps that winter and volunteered to help us, whoever wanted to restart the educational system for the Japanese American on the higher level. I went to the school and told them they were wasting my time, give me my diploma before I finished high school, and they gave it to me, and I left by trade, and I worked for my room and board, and it was 50 of us that reopened the University of California at Berkeley. My parents' major concern was the breakdown of the family. We never ate with our parents. Being typical teenagers, we ate with our friends. We went to dances because the older internees who had been in high school outside of the camps wanted to make life as easy and familiar to us when we left the camp. So they made arrangements, and the town of Delta people were very kind to us. They let their high school have intramural sports with us. So we had football and baseball that way, and I even did basketball. But we had clubs like other people, and we had dances. In the fall of 1943, the government decided to question our loyalty. They sent out questionnaires and wanted to know if we were loyal to the United States. At that point, I assumed I was loyal, otherwise I wouldn't have gone into camp quietly. Question 27, are you willing to serve in the armed forces? If you wanted your civil rights back, that was considered a no answer. Question 28, forego any allegiance to the Japanese emperor. Our parents who were born in Japan by law could not become U.S. citizens at that time. That would have made them people without a country. But if you answered no to any of those questions, you were removed from our camp, put into another camp, and families were broken up because some of the boys said yes and others said no. And this was a period of time that the young men decided to volunteer for the Army to prove their loyalty to the United States. And shortly after that, the draft started in the camps, and that my brother, who had just finished high school, left camp for the Army. And I think this is a good time for Terry to tell you about the 442. Thank you.
During the darkest days of Japanese American history, they had very few Caucasian friends. Those few who talked in favor of the Japanese Americans did so at huge sacrifice to their career as well as their lives. Governor Ralph Carr of Colorado said, "Internment is unconstitutional. Stop it. Don't do that." He was branded as pro-Japanese American. During the next U.S. senatorial elections that he ran, he was a sure winner. But when the votes were counted, he lost. And that was for the reason he stood. Some 5,000 Japanese Americans were already in the U.S. Army when war began. General John DeWitt, military governor of the Pacific Coast, decided to discharge them. Many of them went home, held their families back, and went to camp with them. Lieutenant General Delasey Emmons, military governor of Hawaii, who faced a more immediate threat of land invasion by Japan, and who left Washington with orders to lock them up on the mainland or on the island of Molokai, decided mass internment was not necessary. He stonewalled Washington for 2 years, including the President of the United States, until land invasion by Japan was no longer possible. Also, 1,432 Japanese American in the Hawaii Territorial Guard were placed in the newly formed 100 Infantry Battalion, shipped to Wisconsin for training, and they were subsequently deployed to Italy for combat. That's a Japanese word that means, like us, children of Japanese immigrant parents. Nisei, individually and in groups, petitioned the government to allow them to serve in combat to prove their loyalty. Washington listened. The 442nd Regimental Combat Team was formed, and the call went out for volunteers. Viewing this as an opportunity to prove their loyalty, 2,500 volunteers were accepted from Hawaii, and 1,500 volunteered from the mainland, including from internment camps. In addition to help win the war, Nisei went to combat for one reason: to prove their loyalty. The only ethnic group that went into combat during World War II for that purpose. Following training, the 442nd was shipped to Italy. By that time, the 100 had been there for 9 months, racked up an impressive record, sustaining huge casualties that the press labeled them the Purple Heart Battalion. The two units merged, the older brothers of the 100 mentoring the younger brothers of the 442nd on the art of war. In September 1944, the 442nd was deployed to France, to the northeastern portion in the Vosges forests, not too far from the German border. After 10 days of very bitter combat, liberating the towns of Belmont, Béfontaine, and Bruers, the 442nd were pulled back for rest, hot shower, and hot meal. But that was not to be. Because the following morning, the division commander ordered them to return to the forest to rescue a battalion that was trapped by the Germans. The commander of the German forces, following his capture, said Hitler had ordered to kill them all, take no prisoners. After 5 days of bitter combat, under conditions of rain, sleet, and snow, 211 Texans walked out. What did this prove? The 442nd was following the Army dictum: don't leave your buddy behind, save them at all costs. It also helped the 36th Division smash the German fortress in the Vosges Forest, thereby giving the 7th Army a clear shot to march into the German homeland. It also put to lie historians' claim that since the days of the Holy Roman Empire, no invading force was able to defeat the force that controlled the Vosges. And it saved the U.S. division commander the embarrassment from having to reveal he lost a battalion. Well, some 15,000 Japanese Americans served in the 442nd. 4,000 served in the Asia Pacific Theater, fighting soldiers of their parents' homeland. They translated captured enemy documents, interrogated prisoners of war, manned the earphones to listen to enemy communication. They served in Burma, with the Merrill's Marauders and the OSS, the first Americans to fight on the Asian continent since the days of the Boxer Rebellion. They entered caves to persuade Japanese soldiers to surrender. The war over, the guns now silent, America turned its attention to rebuilding the nation and the world. General George C. Marshall reminded Washington there was one more issue to resolve: the Japanese issue, the integration of Japanese in the American society. Washington called on the 442nd, which was doing occupation duty in Italy. The 442nd was reviewed by President Truman at the Ellipse on July 15, 1946. It rained very hard that morning, and the president's military advisor is said to have advised him to cancel his portion of the day's event. The president is said to have replied, "Hell no. For what these boys have done, I can stand a little rain." He told the 442nd, "You fought the enemy abroad and you fought prejudice at home and you won." Those comments affirmed Japanese-American loyalty, and it represented the highest level effort on the part of the government to defeat racism and prejudice against Japanese Americans. Those comments resonated across the land, supported by strong editorials, one of which won the Pulitzer. The Nisei and the Tuskegee Airmen settled the question of loyalty and contributed to the Washington climate for post-World War II reforms, thereby leveling the playing field for minorities to compete for any job and any rank. During World War II, the highest rank of a Japanese American was major, and there were only 4. And they were assigned almost exclusively to the infantry. Fast forward to the Vietnam War. They would serve in all branches of service, in the most sensitive war planning positions, in the cockpits of fighters and bombers as pilots and navigators, with ranks of major, lieutenant colonel, and colonel. Following the Vietnam War, over 100 Asia-Pacific Americans, including 43 Japanese Americans, would be promoted to flag rank. Competing with the best of the best, Japanese Americans succeeded in reaching the highest plateau in the military, in the government, academia, business, and the other disciplines. The Civil Liberties Act of 1988 noted that internment was not necessary, that it was caused by racial prejudice, war hysteria, and the failure of political leadership. And it also caused President Ronald Reagan to offer a formal, official apology for the internment. A couple of years ago, the Nisei were awarded the Congressional Gold Medal, the highest honor our nation can bestow. And more recently, the United States Senate, senators selected from among them a Japanese American to serve as President pro tempore of the United States Senate, a position constitutionally that put Senator Dan Inoue third in line for the presidency. Only 70 years ago, the same Nisei was classified alien, unfit for military duty, disowned by his government. Ladies and gentlemen, The Japanese-American story speaks of the greatness of America. God bless the USA.
Open up for questions. Do anybody have any questions?
Before we get into the question, I have a story to tell.
Okay, please do.
Before we go into the Q&A, I have a brief story to tell. I heard there was a large number of Filipino Americans on the base, and the story is about the military intelligence service. The Japanese Americans served in it. On March 31st, 1944, the commander-in-chief of the Japanese naval forces in the Pacific decided to move his headquarters from Palau to Davao, which is located in southern Mindanao. And at 10 p.m. that night, they took off in two planes. The commander of the Pacific Forces, Naval Forces in one, and his chief of staff in the other. Over the Philippines, they encountered a huge tropical storm. The commander of the Pacific Forces, his plane vanished in the storm. And the chief of staff, his plane crash landed just about 2 miles off of the island of Cebu City. And there were 9 survivors, including the chief of staff. What he had in his possession was a top secret document, the naval document to defeat the American naval force. Following morning, this was 2:30 in the morning this happened. They ditched the plane. It's about 8 a.m. in the morning. Filipino fishermen and villagers rescued these 9 Japanese and turned them over to the Filipino guerrillas, who in turn turned them over to the U.S. stay-behind contingent on the island. Very smart. A couple mornings later, by then the Japanese were scurrying about looking for them, as well as looking for the document. 2 mornings later, on April the 3rd, 1944, Filipino villagers living near the shore, not too far from Cebu City, saw something bobbling on the shore of the water. They retrieved it, opened it, and saw a very impressive looking document wrapped up in leather case. They had the smarts to know that that document could be important. Meanwhile, of course, the Japanese were frantically looking for the document as well as the survivors. These villagers turned the documents over to the guerrillas, and they in turn turned it over to the American stay-behind contingent. The Japanese put a $25,000 reward on the document. So the American contingent knew that that could be very important, what they had. And they arranged with General MacArthur's headquarters to send a submarine. They had a submarine pickup on the next island, and this was, the submarine pickup was at a precise time, and the operation went beautifully. It was done not by Americans, but the transfer of the document finally was by a Filipino district commander who ostensibly was working for the Japanese, but actually was working for the American side. And the submarine carried the document as well as 25 refugees to Australia, 9 days. And they were bombed, but those were the times that they went down, but most of the time they were on the surface to gain speed. That document was translated in Australia by General MacArthur's headquarters, sent to SINCPAC in Honolulu, and it was then sent to the military commanders that was meeting in Eniwetok for the next invasion. What this document proved was a combination of very patriotic Filipino nationals, working closely with the American stay-behind operation, and achieved one of the greatest naval victories for the U.S. in the Pacific. So what I'd like to do is take this opportunity to salute the Filipino Americans who are working on the base. I'm sorry to have been so long-winded.
Okay, we'll take 5 minutes for a Q&A with Mr. Shima, Ms. Murakami. Anybody have any questions?
Mayor, thank you for sharing that story. It's amazing. Can you share what you would be willing to share about what the days and years after the release from the camp was like for your family and what the lasting impacts were?
Well, the camps closed October 31, 1945. You had to choose where you wanted to go. If you were going back to California, they dragged out those old trains, but if you wanted to go someplace else, they gave you a bus ticket. Everybody was given as many army blankets as you could take and $25 and you were on your own. The problem was from I was in school at Berkeley. My sister was working out here. My brother was in the Army. So my parents decided that they should settle in Berkeley. And they came to Berkeley, and this was the way it was all the way through the Western Defense area. The discrimination was greater than before the war, and it was almost impossible to find any place to live. And when we first arrived there, I had quit my job for my room and board, and the semester had ended because Cal was on a wartime basis, 3 semesters a year. And I decided to quit school to help my parents. Most of the young people found a job working room and board at night. The standard was 2 hours a night of work, and then found a daytime job, usually menial. And my father finally called my sister who was out here and said, we do need a house. Because at that time, my sister and I were at one hostel. My father and mother and brother was at the church hostel, and we were eating at a third home, which was quite typical of everybody. We were getting your meals, whoever had a house to cook in. And so she bought us a house, and then a family came to my father and requested that they be allowed to live in our garage. So they lived in the garage until they earned enough money, and we shared our kitchen and bathroom, but it was much better living than in camp. And this went on for years. My father finally felt the family was stable enough that I could go back to school. And I tried to get a dishwashing job in the laboratory up at, above Cal was the cyclotron. And when I applied there, they said I didn't have Western Defense clearance, so I couldn't wash their dishes. But at the Life Science Building at Cal, they didn't care about Western Defense clearance. I was able to wash their lab equipment. And so times were very, very difficult after the war. And one reason we settled out here was there was even a quota system from before the war on graduate school. They were only taking 2 or 3 Asians, no blacks at the top professional school. My husband wanted to become a dentist, so he kept reapplying. And then finally, we heard from someone back east, and he was at USC Dental School, but he wasn't finished, and he went to camp, and then he went into the Army. And when he tried to complete his dental education, no dental school would take him except Howard. So he told all the Japanese Americans, if you want to complete your degrees, then come to Howard. And so that's how we ended up here. We were going to go home. He promised in 5 years, maybe 10 years. We're still here. He was retired. At 87 years old, we're still here.
Thank you.
Yes, I'm a guest.
Hi. My grandfather was in the 442, and when I was a kid, I asked him what his best story from Italy was. And he got this faraway look in his eyes, and he started talking about when he got his wisdom teeth taken out in Italy. And so that was his best story. I was wondering if Mr. Shima could tell us his best story from this time in Italy.
What was your best story?
Actually, I was not in combat because the day I arrived, our group arrived in Naples, Italy, was the day that the war ended. But I guess my best story of the 442nd was to return with a unit to handle public relations in New York and Washington, D.C. with the president. And that's where I heard the story about the president's military advisor advising. And it was handling the public relations. Of course, most of the work was done by the War Department, Public Relations Office. But interfacing with them and with the public, a 22-year-old kid, it was an awesome experience. And as you see, I'm still doing public relations.
Okay. If no other questions, I would like to thank our honorees, and I would like to now invite Ms. Burroughs, a captain, up to a presentation of a.
As a little token of our appreciation, on behalf of the Naval Surface Warfare Center, EOD Technology Division, I just have a little something for both of you. And thank you very much for coming and sharing your stories. Wonderful.
Thank you very much.
And now, closing remarks is Dr. Doyle.
First, I'd like to thank our speakers for coming today. It's a very rare occasion that we get to hear such riveting stories so enthusiastically and genuinely told by people who have an experience outside of what is the norm for most of us. I think it brings to mind the value of the American experience, how with the courage, commitment, and determination that was shown by the Japanese American community, the loyalty and commitment to the principles of democracy and justice comes through so strongly even after all of these years. So I'd like to give you my personal thanks, and I'm sure that the others here will join me in expressing our appreciation. Appreciation for your willingness to come and share your lives with us. And now we would like to share some of our lives, or at least some of our culinary skills with you. We have a modest buffet featuring dishes from the Asian Pacific Islands, various different cultures represented there. So I hope that you will be joining us for a small repast. And also I'd like to invite all of the people who are here to come and greet our guests. And if you have other questions that perhaps you thought were better for one-on-one rather than the group, I'm sure that they would be happy to talk to you. So thank you again very much for being with us today.